Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. It took so much goodness to get here. We appreciate all of you for your patience as we continue to work on the tech. So one of the things that you'll notice is that you see my great picture, but you do not see my face. That might be the world saying that the picture is better today. As we work out the tech around making sure that you can see our faces, if folks can just let us know who's here. So in the chat box, if it's possible, if you can say your name and where you're calling in from today. Um, and yeah, anything that you're excited to hear in the conversation. And we're gonna get started in about 1 minute. And it looks like thanks for everyone who just put in the Q&A that there's some challenges with the chat. So we're gonna try to enable it soon. Thanks for your patience. So as we get started, folks, I'm going to share a bit about why we're so excited that you all can be here today. And then I'll take a quick pause, and then we'll see if we can make sure we get all the good tech stuff going. Let me say a few things. We know how important it is for us to be in space with each other, for us to understand and hear each other, and for us to connect in these ways. We also know the challenges with tech and living in the virtual reality. So, one, we love and appreciate all of you for your grace and patience as we navigate the weird world of Zoom. But I also just want to say a special thank you and a lots of love to the folks behind the scenes, but actually not really behind the scenes, the folks who do the hard work of making these kinds of calls possible. So lots of love to the BFF team, to our incredible interpreters, and to our researchers, our speakers, our contributors, all the folks that do the work so that we can be here today. I'm going to share a few remarks, folks, and then we're going to hear from our incredible speakers, Yannia, Sofia, and Cynthia. One of the things that's really important for us today before we jump in to this research is we're here to discuss the importance of resourcing Black feminist movements. And it was important for us to acknowledge what day this is. We know that 4 years ago was the murder of Mario Franco. And if we're gonna have a conversation, we are gonna have a conversation about what it means to stand in solidarity of Black feminist leaders and Black feminist movements around the world. It's important that today we honor her life and legacy. And a big part of honoring her life and legacy is continuing to do the work of showing up for our movements. And so we couldn't think of a more important day in that honoring to talk about where is the resources for and against Black feminist movements and what is required of us. What is required of us in these moments to resource our movements as we set the Black Feminist Fund like we want them to win. And so that's the conversation today. I want to introduce our incredible researchers that contributed to the Where is the Money for Black feminist movements. Isn't this a good picture, fam? It's so good. 18 months ago is when this process started to really do an assessment of where the money is for Black feminist movements. And this would not be possible without these 5 incredible faces you see in front of you. So thank you to Yannia, Sofia, to Cynthia, to Awa, to Mai, and to Timiebi, folks who put a lot of love and a lot of thoughtfulness and brilliance into making this research possible. And so we hope that you read every 146 pages. And today we're going to get into 2 chapters. And so next slide, please. Thank you. So first, we're going to talk about the chapter through the philanthropic lens. that is led by Cynthia. We can now see Cynthia's face. Hey, Cynthia. And I'm going to share a little bit more about Cynthia's work in this chapter. Thanks for joining us. And then we have Sofia, Yannia Sofia, in the work around really doing the study around the opposition, because we recognize that it's so important for us to have a meaningful conversation on the opposition. So let me read Yannia Sofia a little about what her chapter is about. We'll go back to Cynthia and read Cynthia's chapter, and then we're going to get into a good conversation. So this is Yannia Sofia. Aren't these pictures good? It is important for us to name that in her chapter, what Yannia Sofia does is reveal that trillions of dollars are channeled every year to the causes that are against bodily autonomy, that are against the reproductive rights, against just economies, dignified labor, peace, ecological care, and stewardship, and all of which are agendas that Black feminists advance. And so it was important for us to understand where the money is for Black feminist movements, but we needed to understand where money is not going. And the money is going to our opposition. And so this assessment, and we'll get into that, Yannia Sofia led, and we're grateful for her for doing that. We'll go back to Cynthia and Cynthia's report. So in Cynthia's chapter, through the film, through the movement lens, we're talking a bit about a deep dive into data and literature produced by philanthropy itself. So through the philanthropic lens, it uncovers an indisputable verdict about the global funding system that has deeply rooted and racialized and gendered trust gap. So through the philanthropic lens and a chapter through the opposition, we're gonna have a conversation about the where the money is and the one the money is not for Black feminist movement. So we're gonna get into it. Okay. So I'm actually going to start. Oh, look at me here now. I kind of liked my picture up. So we're gonna get into it. I'm gonna actually start with you, Cynthia, around the research. Oftentimes we talk about the research and the findings. We're gonna get into it, but I'm curious to start with you and to hear from you, Cynthia, about why you thought this research was important for us to be able to do and share with the world. Why your particular chapter, you felt was important, anything you want to share about your journey in doing the research. So pass it to you, Cynthia.
Great. Thank you, Tynesha. And, I just thank you to the Black Feminist Fund for everything that you've done, particularly for this really important body of different types of research. So, as I was thinking about this question, for me, what's really most important about this research is the fact that these are things that we know, that we've known intuitively, that we've known anecdotally, and that we've experienced as Black women's rights and feminist organizations. And so the opportunity to actually, for ourselves, look at the data that is out there, understanding that trying to shift things, oftentimes we're asked for evidence. What is the evidence showing? What work are you guys really doing? And yes, money is in fact going to women's rights organizations, et cetera. So from where I sit, it was just such an incredibly important exercise to look at the data that is currently collected that we know very much informs then where the money is going, or also kind of lets, I think, philanthropy in some ways off the hook about the kind of work that they should be doing, and particularly where there is how well matched what they claim their interests and intentions are with, in fact, where the money is going. So for me, it was really important to do this research as an exercise in really confirming. It confirmed, I think, as I mentioned, what we have suspected and what we experience in terms of accessing resources. It's also important in my mind in preventing philanthropy from saying we didn't know. No, I think that's also kind of another excuse that's often used of, well, we didn't actually know that this was such a big problem. And so for us to put together this research, and really importantly for Black feminists to have put together this research, I think for me was another aspect of importance for this research. And I think that the final thing that I would say, Tynesha talked about us having started this work 18 months ago. Many of us as the researchers actually finished the research several months ago. But the reason it's coming out, many months after we finished the research is because of the importance that Black Feminist Fund places on making the research as accessible as possible. So taking the time to translate it into the key languages that Black Feminist Fund is working with, and literally everything that you do as a Black Feminist Fund is interpreted into all these languages. And so, I think the general practice is, well, we put it out in English first, and then the translations will come after. The fact that you are making everything available right now for all of us in the community speaking multiple languages to be able to engage with it at the same time in community, for me, is also what makes this research really important. And the way, not only how we put it together as a team of Black feminists, but also how Black Feminist Fund has chosen to make sure that it first kind of hits the world in as accessible and multiple languages as possible.
Cynthia, thank you for that. I'm going to take a moderator's privilege and ask you a follow-up question, and then I'm going to you next, Yannia, Sofia. One of the things that you named was one of the Black Feminist Fund. It's important for it to be accessible, and so as you shared, this report is in Spanish and Portuguese and English and French and in Arabic, and that takes the time it should take, and make sure that all of our folk have access to it. Is there anything else about the journey as a researcher and contributor to this project that you have identified was like, that's the Black feminist way to do it? Because oftentimes in research and in creating of reports, there's lots of ways, and even as Black feminists, there's a desire to conform to a kind of way or whitewashing of doing and producing this kind of data and story. Are there any other ways in which you're like, this is the way Black feminists write reports and produce findings and work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. For me, that there's various elements of that. The first is the choice to have this done by Black feminists. And we're all actually from quite different disciplines. So that in itself is exciting. Secondly is, my conversation with Akima is, look, we want research on philanthropy. That's essentially as far as it went. And I imagine it was a similar exercise with the rest of the researchers, in that we had very wide sort of purview to structure the research as we wanted. For every kind of step of the way in the research, the engagement with Hakima for me was incredibly important. And I know sort of one of the questions you wanted us to engage on is sort of the personal journey. So I'll leave that a little bit later, but I do want to flag right now how important for me in my own personal journey and with what this research has meant to me and the ways of doing this research has meant to me in terms of the role that Hakima played. So not only, as a cheerleader for us as we're doing this research, but, there were moments at the beginning of the research, for example, where we all got together as the team of researchers, got to meet each other, also got to know the different pieces of research that we were working on. So as we were individually doing our research, we had also in the back of our minds what other research was happening. And in our community, oftentimes, our or somebody else would come across some research that she felt was actually really helpful for my chapter. And likewise, I may have come across some research that was also really important for other chapters. So it's not like we sort of put in a bid, which I think is also kind of another fairly common way of sort of doing this kind of research where somebody's a lead researcher and is kind of identifying other researchers. But Black Feminist Fund itself, as staff, did not do the research. They brought together a community of a collective of researchers, but sort of worked with us in a way that allowed for our different pieces to speak to each other, to elevate each other as we were doing the research, but also really the different sort of moments that we were brought together, both to kick off the research, as well as to reflect on the research as we were going along the research journey. So for me, those are very, very different kind of experiences of either doing research or indeed just, I think, my own kind of reflections of, well, when you were perhaps commissioning research, how did you go about it? And I think the lessons that I myself am drawing from how Black Feminist Fund went about doing the research that I will also have to apply just in the work that I'm doing right now and any work that I do in the future. I think the how, not the what, the how we went about doing the research is as important as the research itself that we were working on.
Thank you so much for that, Cynthia. Big ups to Hakima for your leadership in getting this report to where it is here and now. And thank you, Cynthia, for naming that there's no place in which our values do not exist, including how we organize these kinds of findings. It needs to always be in community. Yannia, Sofia, I want to bring you in into the conversation and start off with the same question that I asked Cynthia. If you can share why was this research important for you, and particularly around your chapter, Yannia, Sofia. Um, particularly around your chapter around why is it important for us to really do an assessment on where the money is in terms of how it's moving to our opposition.
Hola con todas. It's a pleasure to meet you all here today. I'm very happy about this space, and I've been listening to Cynthia and listening to also reading the chat, and everyone is just incredible. And I'm like, wow, look at what we're doing is really, it's, it's touching many loved ones. And a lot of times we feel like we're alone. A lot of times we feel like we're by ourselves, thinking about the world. And I feel like the possibility to do this investigation and encounter each other allows us to feel good. And we've had to resist many different kinds of environments. And this is what we are missing, the opportunity to come together. And this investigation has allowed me to, I think there was like a moment when we were doing the revision of the text, and I shared this with Naima and other folks, like I never thought that I could work in something that had so much interest to know about. And this was the first time that I really was able to come to like dignified conclusions and like felt dignified in the conditions that I had to do this work, had to do this investigation. And these aren't easy things. Talking about militarization isn't easy. Talking about agendas against Black women is not easy. Talking about extractive economies isn't easy. And for everything that that means, you know, talking about these wastes of money and salary, but like finally, we have a little bit, we have something to continue to connect between other work that folks are doing. And so I feel like this is really, it's just grand, it's beautiful. And I'm really honored to be able to do this with all the, you know, trials and tribulations that occur. And excuse my voice, I'm coming out of a cold. And I feel like, and I'm just kind of going back through the question that you had asked Cynthia, why was what was a fundamentally feminist way to investigate? And I think for me, they don't allow us to feel sufficiently. And I think that a lot of us who've been in different spaces, like with the state, with the university, with white supremacy institutions that tell us, including even with all the force and strength that we are moving, it never seems to be enough. And so I feel with this team, it's been sufficient. And I think that's important. And that has been very nutrient full during the process and definitely these last 18 months. So yeah.
Yannia, Sofia, that was a really stunning way to put it. Like, how do we do everything in a fundamentally Black feminist way? And what you named is very much connected to what Cynthia talked about. Is if we're going to do all the work that we do, including this research, we need to create a dignified space in which the Black feminists like yourselves were contributing could feel nourished and supported and in community with each other as they were doing it. So I just appreciate the both of you talking about the journey, and the how is actually as important as the what, which is a core Black feminist principle. So we're going to get into the findings, fam. And Yannia, Sofia, I'm going to stay with you on this particular question around, they always say what surprised you, and it might not be something that, so it could be something that surprised you, but something that's sticking with you. I'll share with me, as I was reading your chapter around the opposition, the one finding around $270 million since 2007 from the Christian right that went to our opposition, that went to anti-rights work, that went to undermining the progress of work around Black women, women's rights, and LGBTQI rights. So that's something that is sticking with me. I don't know if I'm surprised, but I'm angry. I'm curious for you, and there's so much that came up in your chapter. What's sticking with you? What's surprising you that you want to share with us today?
Do you want to start, Cynthia?
So we'll start with you. We'll start with you, Yannia, Sofia, and then we're going to go to Cynthia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Many things. I think one surprise was that the world invests 23 times more in security than other countries. And so what is it that we're doing in order to survive? How are we able to survive collectively? And I think that I'm really interested in having these conversations and experiences and investigations around, if there's so much that is moving, there's so much money that's moving against us, and encountering what we've done and what we have done, how much does that cost? What is the value? Where's the experiences of resistance? Can we assign it even a value, a number? Because the monetary value only dimensions a particular type of infrastructure, financial infrastructure. But there's also, a dimension of the force, the energy behind that work and that labor. And so I want to focus more in that. We're resisting these huge structures, and what does that cost? What is that value in quantitative terms? And what does that signify in terms of neglect or undoing care that we're doing? And I feel like this is part of the work of the research and the investigation. And so immigration is real. The disappearance of mothers and young girls, we're putting our hand into our day-to-day schedule, and we're having to get involved in agendas that are not in our favor. And so it's real when we're taken away from our territory. And so how do we connect these two things? And I think this has generated a lot of desire for me to know and to tell these stories in a distinct way. How has our strength and our force been to maintain us in that process? And there's a couple other notes, but I think in general, we have to prepare ourselves, get ready to understand, what does it mean in this time when we're talking about climate justice and environmental justice, and we're pushing these agendas around green policies, and what are we doing in order to survive? And I think that there's some friends that talk about racism evolves their own instruments, and so we need to be pay attention to what instruments and mechanisms are they creating to not only resist them, but also continuing to dismantle them. And so I'm gonna connect my computer because my battery is dying.
Thank you, Yannia, Sofia, both for the responses and energizing your computer so you could be with us. Cynthia, tell us a finding that is resonating, sticking with you. I know all of them are, but one of them that you want to share with us today.
Sure. I might cheat a little bit and perhaps speak to more than one, if I may, but I would say just very, very, very brief. I did want to highlight this for us, which is when looking at the data that we have about the geographies, it was particularly striking to me, both how little goes to the Caribbean region, which is it has a significantly large Black population. No, there is extremely little going to that region and very little that is documented even. So when we found the little information that we're able to find, just so that for me in terms of kind of what the regions are looking like and resourcing to the different regions was particularly striking to me, how little goes to the Caribbean and also how little information we have about the Caribbean. I think the main perhaps kind of takeaway for me, and you touched upon that in my introduction, is the trust gap and how that manifests. And so I wanted to sort of speak a little bit about that. You know, I looked at, you know, in some of sort of the official data that is collected that we get through the Human Rights Funders Network report, or to a lesser extent, OECD, there's some discussion about the barriers and the biases that exist. But what I found really interesting is the different articles that come out and perhaps what might be described as kind of gray literature that have been for a little while highlighting the barriers and the biases that have made it such a challenge for Black feminist-led organizations to access resources for the important work that we're doing. I think the greatest evidence for me about the trust gap is the data that shows, and this is data that we got from, essentially from the Human Rights Funders Network, is when you look at kind of direct funding, and by direct funding, I mean, you know, private philanthropy or bilateral governments, who actually they give the money to and how that money then trickles down. So in terms of direct funding, and within the direct funding, the percentage of that funding that is in fact flexible, that allows for organizations to do the work that they really want to do in a holistic fashion, to adapt and pivot as the context changes. And here, you know, really kind of linking with the research that Yannia Sofia did about just the ever-growing challenges and pushback against all the gains that we have made over the years. So, you know, if we look at Africa, for example, only 33% of funding overall, of which there's hundreds of millions, only 33% goes directly to African organizations. And of that, only 8% is flexible funding. In the Caribbean—
Cynthia, say that one more time. Cynthia, repeat that one more time. That begs to say it one time.
Yeah, so 33% of funding goes directly to African-led organizations. That means the rest of that funding is going to international NGOs that are based in the global north. Some of them are sort of quote unquote localizing. I think that's a separate conversation, but only 33% is going directly to African-led organizations, and only 8% of that is flexible funding. The Caribbean, as I mentioned before, is an even dire picture. So only 18% of direct funding, only 2% of flexible funding. North America, as we can understand, is 100% of organizations in North America. Again, please keep in mind that here I'm talking about the Human Rights Funders Network, which doesn't necessarily capture the within US only kind of funding. So in North America, you find that 100% of organizations are getting the funding directly, but only 29% is flexible. Europe is similar, about 87% of Europe-based organizations are getting the funding directly, but the flexible funding is quite low at only 11%. Latin America is also, comes after Western Europe with 60% of direct funding to organizations and up to 20% in flexible funding. and the MENA region, which there too, we really struggled to get funding. The sort of the additional research that Hakima and Kelea did as part of also this research found that only one organization in that region was documented as being funding. But when we look at kind of the figures around direct funding versus flexible funding for the MENA region, we found that 46% of organizations were receiving direct funding, but only 9% of that was flexible. So, not enough sort of direct funding, but also even within that funding, so little of it that is flexible. And again, that I mentioned that as being important because that is something that we have been calling for years and years, not only as Black feminists, certainly others. So it is really striking to see just how little of flexible funding continues to be dispersed, which suggests that the majority remains sort of very project driven, which then suggests that philanthropic institutions are predetermining what priorities are and how those priorities align with the communities, with the Black feminist funds and organizations and others, I would say is still a big question. So there's a big gap also on that front. The final thing that I would say is in terms of kind of I think that is also important and that was striking for me is, in at least a couple of conversations that I had, the research I also, was able to talk to a number of Black feminist funds and other feminist funds as well. It's clear that, when you name us in your strategies, in your external facing indication of priorities, we are more likely to seek that funding and we're also more likely to access that funding. So for example, I spoke to a feminist fund that works in Central America largely, and they talked about how they put out calls and sort of in some ways hope that Afro Central American organizations and communities would apply. And year on year, they were getting few to no applications. This began to change after some research that was done by another philanthropic organization, where they sort of did a mapping of Afro-led organizations in the region. They shared this research with this feminist fund so that the next time the feminist fund did a call, they intentionally targeted and made sure and actually reached out way beyond their usual circles. As a result of which they were actually able to identify, they essentially went from almost like 0 to maybe 2 organizations to up to 10 organizations that they are now beginning to fund. So these, again, sort of are things that are embedded. And I think for philanthropic institutions to not assume that because you sort of say, for example, that we prioritize racial justice and we prioritize gender justice, you need to actually go beyond that in articulating what your priorities and your commitments, so that you are in fact inviting in organizations that may not be your usual suspects, or organizations that have in fact taken a look at at what your external facing sort of posture, as well as what you have historically perhaps funded, for them to see themselves in what it is you're saying about the resources that you have, that you make available.
Thank you, Cynthia. I mean, I'm still struck by that. Only one grant could be found that went to Black women, trans, and girls, people in the MENA region, that only one single grant. Like, that says a lot. And then this piece that you're naming, Cynthia, with a big around trust, and that philanthropy often, the opposite of trust is control. And the way that these grants around restricted support towards project base is more about control than it is about actually trusting Black feminist leadership. And then that level of control often leads to surveillance and is quite harmful and dangerous and does not actually allow for Black feminist values to flourish. So I appreciate all that you lifted up, Cynthia. And I appreciate your rule breaking too. You said one, I'm gonna give you all the goodness. And so we love it. Keep it coming. I'm gonna go to the question again around the journey, because you both spoke so beautifully about it. And just, and Cynthia, you mentioned it, and Yannia, Sofia, you did too, that this work is not easy in terms of really assessing the harm that philanthropy has had on our movements, and at the same time rejoicing and celebrating the power and beauty of our movements too, and our folks and our communities and what they're doing. and how they're leading and resisting. So would love each of you just to talk about your journey, and anything that you want to share in relation to your journey around these last several over a year in doing this report. So anyone can jump in first.
I'm looking at Sofia if she wants to go first. I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Yannia, Sofia, would you like to go first?
Okay.
Or Cynthia? All right, Yannia,
Should I
Sofia.
Sí,
start?
pero
Okay.
quiero.
But I want to add one thing that I think is obvious, but I think it's important to name. And we have spoken a lot about like institutions that control resources. And I think it's important to also name in the beginning that we have evidence the resources that are dedicated to extractivism, mining, or whatever, monoculture, for example, are the same resources that are part of agreements between security, public security, and militarization. Those are the same resources that talk about or that go to migration. Those are the same resources that go to the philanthropy, anti-right philanthropy. And so when we're talking about these movements that are resisting, we at the end up receiving resources from those sources. And at the same time, those institutions are making connections and interconnections between fiscal irresponsibility. And so we're making the same kind of cycle of extraction. And I think it's really important to dismantle that. I think there's have some kind of campaign for transparency that we can understand and see how those funds are being distributed, because it was really hard to be able to find information in between like continents, because each country has their own understanding. So there's a large lack of information in between these two or these multiple countries. And so I think that when we're talking about the African diaspora, we need to weave those resources better. And so in reference to the journey about the investigation, I think I'm going to go back a little bit with this question. What I believe with a lot of places to do investigations and the different work that feminists need and people who are part of movements, what we need is, in certain ways, I don't really like this word, but I'm going to use, we need to have some kind of guardianship in terms of like, what are the think tanks talking about in terms of security? What are these think tanks that talk about food security? What are they talking about climate justice, which is the way to talk about climate justice in terms of finances? I was reading in the chat, how do we not leave us behind? Doesn't matter if we're in Honduras or Salvador, if we're in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, or Bolivia, Colombia, how do we not leave each other behind? And I think that this writing has provided a concrete example where we can connect a lot of us, a lot of leaders, in terms of to be connect, like we're connected, we're sharing with each other all the time what we're doing, and how we can support and how to like activate and support in simple and profound ways. And how do we, instead of like pointing the finger, how do we sustain us? How do we sustain each other more? And I'm really excited to be able to know names. Sometimes there's like a meeting and I'm just like writing down all the names of the people who are participating in the meeting. And I'm just doing the same thing in this moment. In the chat, I'm just like, oh, wow, oh, this. And so like these people, you all are my references. These are the people that we are connected to because we're alive. And that's how we're moving. And so I would love, if I want to know information about Zimbabwe. And so I'm going to look at the profiles like here, and what gives me a guarantee that this person has a feminist lens, because unfortunately there's women who are moving in the world without a feminist perspective. And so in that regard, it's easier to have a map of where we are making a path. And so I think it's that, a lot of that. And I'm really grateful to the Black Feminist Fund for making it possible, making so much possible. And I think that's what I would like to say in this moment.
Thank you, Yannia, Sofia. Quick tech update. We apologize for also just announcing this again for folks that don't know, is that in the Zoom world, sadly, for whatever reason, Arabic was not offered in the list down. So Arabic is being offered, and thanks to the folks who are here, our interpreters, but it's offered in the Korean channel. So just in case, as a reminder for folks who are listening in. Cynthia, I'm going to go to you. Same question.
Yeah, thank you. I can really only build on what Yannia Sofia says. And for me, the most important word is community, and what this research and what the Black Feminist Fund means on that front. So I mentioned that this work has been very much has really been an important part of my personal journey. So I worked in philanthropy for 10 years, left it for 4 years, and then back again. When the Black Feminist Fund pulled together the first Black women in philanthropy convening a little over a year ago, it was a very emotional moment for many of us who work as women in Black philanthropy. It is a very challenging place to be in, and one can often feel sort of gaslit and working from a posture of defensiveness while trying to push through work that is really important for the movements that we're wanting to support. So I don't think we can underestimate the importance of regularly convening Black women in philanthropy. Certainly my experience is that we had our own informal community in the organization that I worked in. We also, kind of built this informal community through the people that we met, other Black women in philanthropy that we met, etc. But to actually pull us all together and to see 100 women, Black women in philanthropy, in all different types of philanthropy, and also at varying stages of our journey within philanthropy was really powerful. So I sort of had this in the back of my mind as I was doing this research. But the research was also very important in being able to do a body of work from a place of support and possibilities, which is a very different way, again, of kind of how oftentimes in philanthropy, you're constantly in a position of having to make a case. You're always sort of making a case. So within the foundation, et cetera, you're trying to figure out how to make a case against significant pushback. So again, when I talk about like the biases and the barriers, particularly those that are written up by Africans, by Black people, by Black feminists, by other feminists in different ways, and affirming that, it wasn't only me, that this was not an experience that was specific to me, but it's actually a collective experience. And so to be able to actually do this work and do writing when you're coming from a place of being so much in a defense posture and constantly making cases that are sort of shot down in, frankly, what I would say quite academic kind of ways. And so that's why, again, pointing to how important it was for me personally to work with Hakima, where I'd begin the research, I was like, wow, this is such an exciting project to do. And then I would start the research and I would get stuck. And I would get stuck because the voices in my head, the loudest voices in my head, were the voices of when I sat in institutional philanthropy. And so it would take sort of, then a number, kind of engaging with Hakima to push past those and say, well, actually, no, what you're doing is, in fact, it is in the right direction, et cetera, et cetera. I think kind of still, I couldn't sort of underemphasize the importance of the impact on Black women in philanthropy of working in philanthropic institutions. It has a personal impact, it has a professional impact. And so the opportunity to do this work in a collective fashion, to do this work in a supportive fashion, was hugely important in my own journey. And I'm sort of, looking a little bit at the chat and chuckling at you, Masejo, who for many years, when we worked together and even after we worked together, would always say to me, but Cynthia, you have to write about this. And the reality is that I never had the confidence to write about it. I would find a whole bunch of excuses, but I did not have the confidence to write about it because of how whatever I had been writing in institutions was met, the resistance. There is deep resistance within philanthropy about the kind of resistance couched in very, nice ways, et cetera. In some instances, are pretty aggressive ways by those who claim to be for racial and gendered justice. So to be able to actually push past that and to be affirmed by, your experience was actually not unique. There are others who have their experience, but more importantly, to actually work and feel that you are contributing something really meaningfully, but doing that collectively. So I think for me, really the kind of the collective exercise, the doing so in community, for me, it really felt like coming back into a community that, this is the community that I've always wanted to work for, has always been my priority. So the coming back to community was really, and also then just the sort of the contribution to my own personal and professional healing, like the actual doing the research, reading, sort of going to the various iterations, the conversations with the other researchers as well. Part of actually our, Hakima kind of bringing us together, I'm convinced, is because she would have one-on-one conversations with each of us and sort of thinking, like, okay, I actually need to bring this whole bunch together. And part of coming together was not only about talking about the research, but reminding ourselves that we're actually doing this in community and affirming and reaffirming each other. So again, it's not only, I'm very proud of this work. I'm proud about the contribution that it's making to philanthropy, but more importantly, also the contribution and what it means for Black feminists and Black women in philanthropy to be able to do this work ourselves and to speak in our own voices. Yes, we were drawing from existing literature, but also really importantly, we were drawing directly from the experiences of Black feminists around the world. So yeah, that was kind of the journey, and it remains, it really kind of re-energized me in many ways, and it gave me a new kind of energy to even, contemplate the idea of rejoining any formal philanthropic institution. I honestly don't think that I would have done that if I hadn't done this work with the Black Feminist Fund. And, the universe works in her own magical ways. I'm absolutely convinced with that. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the last consultancy work that I did was this research before I joined the Equality Fund. I do think that there's the universe that was a journey that she wanted me to take.
Cynthia, I was watching the chat box, and it was lit up with appreciations and affirmations for what you just shared. So thank you for sharing it. So I have a question that came in, and it's going to be our last question of the time that we have. I can't believe we're almost out of time. So the question is, this report has been described as a call to action. Who are you calling to action, and what do you want to see them do? Yannia, Sofia, we'll start with you, and then Cynthia, we'll go to you.
Thank you for all the people who are organizing to care and defend life. I am I just feel so much when Cynthia was talking to make community, create community, because that's that's making communities what they want to extinguish. And so I think those practices can be collective. And so the call is continuing to create collectivity and to care. Another or one call. This call implies that we are actualizing, that we are, reconsidering the debt, not only like the external doubt, but the debt that we have with our lives and our relationship with other species. And there's a particular discourse that they're pushing, and I see that we are the ones that are pulling the world back so that it doesn't fall into the abyss. And so I think I feel that we are doing that, getting to know what we're doing and identify who are doing those practices, those collective practices, and sharing that information in as many languages as possible. Not just with the, feminist fund and the research, but like with all of our experiences in many parts of the world. And, wherever there are Black feminist movements, because we are inspired by and bring our dignity. And so I feel that this call is to also not let us be alone, to look for how we communicate with each other. How do we have fun? We have a lot of fun and pleasure in this process. And so I think that in those dimensions.
Cynthia, I see you smiling in response to Yannia. Sofia, take us home. Who's this call for, and what are you hoping for it?
So for me, the call is for two communities. I will start with our own, recognizing and reaffirming that information is power and information is political. And we haven't yet perhaps used the word political, but this entire exercise, the very existence of the Black Feminist Fund, is a political endeavor. And what we have pulled together collectively across these chapters is very powerful and very political information. We've talked about how it has affirmed the experiences that we may have felt were perhaps either unique to us or to our organizations, affirming that no, it is in fact a collective experience. I think that in and of itself is powerful. It certainly, I think, will give us a boost in wherever it is we sit, and in doing this work, to know that we're not doing it alone, to know that there are the hands that are holding us, under our feet. We stand on the shoulders of those that have gone before us in various ways. So there is that aspect. I think it's really, again, one of the things that I really love about how we're going about disseminating this research is within the community, and really emphasizing the importance of getting this research back out to the Black feminist community. I would like to put out a call for even more information and more data. And one of the things that I would love, I think is really, again, important for us to to complement and to reinforce this first research that we have done, is data that speaks to what we are doing, pulling together that information collectively. We know the ways in which Black feminist thinking and organizing has influenced so much social justice work.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's in civil, political rights, and particularly areas that are not considered to be quote unquote women's rights work. And here, thank you for invoking and bringing Marielle Franco into the room today, because in my mind, she is somebody who represents exactly that, the contributions, the kind of work that Black feminist organizations are doing in social justice writ large. And yet again, oftentimes, coming back to philanthropy, when we're constantly being challenged and asked, because the bar is set so much higher for us to prove that what we're doing is important. I think there is something, again, just even starting for ourselves to compile what it is we're doing, whether what it is we're doing to resist the kinds of challenges that Yannia Sofia speaks to in her research, or the challenges indeed that we face in our own institutions and in just the business of pushing for a more just world. I really would love for us, wherever we sit, we can do it in our institutions. We can certainly do it from perhaps collective bodies, whether it is the Prospera network of feminist funds or other kind of collectives. How do, we need to compile and therefore be able to tell a collective and a big story, really, of what it is we're doing. I think we can also continue to build on the gaps in telling our stories of what it is that we're doing. Our taking control of those stories rather than others telling the story on our behalf and sort of saying, well, women's rights and Black feminist organizations, we're not quite sure what they're doing, or they're doing very small scale things. We are in fact doing pretty big scale things. We may be doing it in small collectives, but they add up to some really hugely significant work, and the impact, I would say, is similarly significant.
Cynthia, I hate to interrupt you because you've given such goodness, and there's so much that we want to continue hearing, but we are at time. So I'm so sorry to apologize. It's going to be more.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I can call the philanthropy people separately. It's okay.
Hey, yeah, we're going to have time. Trust. So we appreciate for folks. We know we're a little bit over time. Give some love to Yannia Sofia and to Cynthia right now for all that they've shared. And I'm going to quickly go through other opportunities for a call to action. Fam, please join us for other events just like this on March 28th and April 14th. So on March 28th, you'll be able to hear from our other great researchers, Awa and Mai, as they discuss their findings on their chapters. On April 14th, we'll also host a Twitter space on Black feminist movements in the MENA region with Mai. And that will be based in both Arabic and English. Please volunteer to organize a session in your networks. This, as Cynthia lifted up and so did Yannia Sofia, we're in this together. So organize a session at your job, at your fund, at your institution, with your friends, with your community. You'll have details from us about how we might be able to support you. There will be a partner toolkit to organize. It'll have different tips and messaging and strategies. So be on the lookout for that. And most importantly, y'all, not most importantly, but important, share a reaction video online, on Instagram, on Twitter, on other social media channels, on your reaction to the findings for the research, and please tag Fund Black Feminists. Y'all, all the report, all language will be available in April. And so we will definitely send out a blast for that. We are so grateful for all of you for attending. We're grateful for our contributors for sharing in this discussion. And we're grateful for all of the power and the call to action, because the call has been made and action will happen, because that's what Black feminists do. Have a great time, a great rest of your day or evening, everyone. And we'll see you all in a couple of weeks at the next session. Take care. Thank you. Al equipo de intérprete también. Thank you, Yannia Sofia. Bye. Take care, everyone. Bye.